1 year ago when I started to learn to code, I was sure that by the time I learned HTML, CSS and JavaScript, companies were going to be fighting over me. There is a labour shortage after all. The more I learned, the more I started to realise that very few companies are actually building anything with just these vanilla technologies, and instead they're using frameworks. But that brings up the question, what framework are you going to learn? And even once you do decide, the next big question is, how do I do this all for free? By the end of this video, you're going to know the answer to all of these questions, and on top of that, I'm going to share with you the resources that I used to learn all of these things for free. I'll also help you speed up your process of learning by sharing with you some of the biggest mistakes that beginners are making, and I'm going to share those throughout the video. Before we get into any of the specific technologies, let's first understand what a website even is and how it works. All a website is a collection of files that exist on a computer called a server, and we can access those files through the internet through our browser like Chrome or Safari. Along with the request that our browser sends to the server, it sends a little bit of data. I'm going to link to a video down below by the BBC, which will help you kind of deepen your understanding on how the internet works. When the server receives a request, sometimes it will process that data and perform different operations with the help of a database, and then it will send those files back to the browser for us to view. If you're writing code for the browser, you're a front-end developer, and that's what I do. If you're writing code for the server and the databases, you're called a back-end developer. If you're one of the people who's going to write code for both the front end and the back end, you're known as a full stack. But don't worry about it, you don't need to be a full stack developer to get a job. You just need to be very proficient in either the front or the back end. How do we learn front-end development? Well, first we need to understand what's actually going on. So consider the Google homepage. You're presented with an input box. This is HTML telling the browser that there's supposed to be an input box here. CSS is what's going to tell the browser that the borders should be rounded and the background color should be white. JavaScript is what's going to tell the browser what action to perform when a search is conducted. The first big mistake that beginners make is they spend a little bit too much time focused on the fundamentals. Now the fundamentals are essential, but you can waste a lot of time going over and over and over the details before moving on to frameworks, which as I mentioned are really important. And this goes back to what I talked about in a previous video where I mentioned utility-based learning. So you want to learn things just enough to progress and then go into the detail when you actually need that detail. What many beginners are going to do is they're going to find a course on YouTube or Udemy, and it might be 10 hours of learning HTML and CSS. Then they're going to do another 20 hours of JavaScript. And by the end of that, they're not going to be able to even make a simple web app. Now, I've got nothing against courses. In fact, I've done a couple myself. But think of this example. If I showed you hours of football tutorials, all the way from the basics, how to kick a football, what part of the foot to use, all the way up to scoring goals, are you going to be ready to join a Premier League football team? Do you think that's what other Premier League football players did? Would watching more tutorials get you closer to that goal? Obviously not. When learning to code, we want to maximize the time of doing and minimize the time of watching. To do this, I always recommend an interactive course, and I recommend specifically the Odin project. This course is excellent, it's totally free, and it's going to take you from complete beginner all the way through to employable developer. There are integrated coding environments and plenty of challenges to keep you engaged along the way. I always say this, but you want to keep your hands on the keyboard and actually code rather than just watching and reading. The other great thing about the Odin project is you're going to get familiar with the other amazing resources online, such as the actual documentation, how to read things, and you're not going to be stuck in tutorial hell. These skills are things that actual developers need on a regular basis. You're not going to remember anything. You're going to have to research and read documentation, and the Odin project really gets you used to that whole idea. I recommend that you do the full fundamentals course, which will take you about 2 to 6 months, depending on how much time you can put in. By building projects, you're going to build up familiarity with the Git workflow, and you're going to create some portfolio projects on your GitHub. Once you finish that, I suggest that you move on to the full stack JavaScript pathway. But instead of following the actual sequence, you just focus on doing the intermediate and advanced HTML and CSS projects. If you're enjoying the process, feel free to go back and do the rest of the JavaScript modules, but it's not necessarily essential. But I definitely suggest that you stop the Odin project when you reach the React chapter. This is, in my opinion, where the Odin project falls down a little bit. Once you've learned HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, you'll start to realize that these technologies are difficult to maintain. You're also going to get a little bit sick of locating HTML elements in your JavaScript just to connect any event listeners. So that's where frameworks come in to kind of make this process a little bit easier while still using these fundamental technologies. As of the recording of this video, the most popular frameworks are React and specifically NextJS, and for CSS using Tailwind CSS. These are the technologies that most startups and freelance companies are looking to hire for. And these are the locations where you're most likely to get a job as somebody with low experience. So React, how do I start learning it? Well, I started learning React using the Odin project, but I quickly realized that the course is a little bit outdated. And by that, I mean it's using class-based components. If you don't know what that means, don't worry too much. Just know that when you're trying to learn React, you want to focus on functional components. The main problem is that the React documentation, the official React documentation, is talking about class-based components. And unfortunately, this is kind of a waste of time. So in order for you to speed up your process, I recommend avoiding them. I've got two much better resources that I'm going to share with you now. The first resource I want to share with you is the React beta docs. They're linked below. And the benefit here is they're actually written by the same React team, but it's the modern version. It just hasn't been released yet. But you can access these on the official website, again, linked down below. And I recommend that you follow along here. They're using hooks, functional components, and all modern JavaScript React code. If this sounds a little bit like gibberish to you at the moment, don't worry, come back to this video once you've spent a couple of days reading around what React is. React is the winning framework if you want to get a job fast. It's got the biggest community, it's got the highest job demands, and it's the easiest to learn from vanilla JavaScript. So I recommend learning React as the fastest route. The second resource that I recommend for learning React is this incredible course by Scrimba. Now this is a free course, and it's amazing that it is free because the Scrimba coding environment is incredible for learning. This particular instructor is incredible. He breaks things down and gives you fantastic challenges along the way that get your hands on the keyboard. The challenges are exactly what you need to be just a little bit beyond your comfort zone, which is where the most learning is going to happen. And the instructor is very encouraging and will correct things along the way. Now, React is a fantastic framework, but it's so good, in fact, that a lot of other companies have started to make meta frameworks for React. And the one that I recommend that you learn is NextJS. NextJS is essentially an easier way of writing React that also helps the websites be optimized for search engine optimization, which is what anybody who owns a website should care about. NextJS is not that difficult to learn once you already understand React, and the best place to learn it is their official documentation, which I'm also going to link down below. Remember, you don't have to understand every single detail, you just need to understand how something works overall before you can build something with it. I recommend that you follow along a really good YouTube tutorial. I'm going to link some down below for you to get comfortable with using NextJS. Once you understand React, it's not a huge stretch. The problem with CSS. Now, once you've written enough CSS code, and you will have done if you followed the Odin project, you're going to realize that it can be a pain to debug. Now, if you've done the Odin project, you're going to understand how to use the dev tools in the Chrome browser and Firefox. You're also going to understand CSS Grid and Flexbox, which are essential if you're doing CSS. The best framework for CSS in 2023 is Tailwind CSS. Bootstrap used to be very popular, but these days, if you're looking for a job, Bootstrap isn't really going to cut it because a lot of the websites made with Bootstrap are a bit cookie cutter looking, and a lot of people want more control over the styling of their website. Tailwind and NextJS is such a popular combination that there's actually a full stack being developed called the T3 stack, just with these frameworks alone. So it's definitely the area to focus for 2023. Learning Tailwind is already pretty easy if you understand CSS because it's essentially inline CSS that helps you compartmentalize your styling with the components that actually concern it. To start learning Tailwind, they have fantastic documentation online, which is where I recommend that you start. They also have an official YouTube page, which I'm going to link down below, which has some great tutorials that you can follow along and get comfortable with the power of Tailwind CSS. I'm sure you're going to love it. If you already know how to use CSS, it's going to be a breeze for you. To tie Tailwind CSS and NextJS together, there's some fantastic tutorials online, which I'm going to link down below. One channel in particular by a guy called Sunny is fantastic. I suggest you follow along a couple of his tutorials and get comfortable to use both technologies together. Following some tutorials by experts is a great way to help you build out portfolio projects, but also understand how things work together. Make a portfolio. You need to make a portfolio site to show off your projects. I suggest building a couple of projects with some beautiful UIs. Then what you want to do is find a beautiful portfolio website for developers and copy it using NextJS and Tailwind CSS. You can then host that website for free using a site like Netlify or Vercel. This is a fantastic way to show what kind of work you can do to employers. It's also essential that you show the live version of your project and the live version of your code, which will be linked to your GitHub account. Now, if you're getting a little bit overwhelmed by all of this, I want you to just please realize that this is the reality, and I'm here to help you get through it as fast as possible. There is an additional technology which you don't necessarily have to learn, but these days it's becoming more and more essential, and that's TypeScript. Now, don't worry, TypeScript is not an entirely new language. If you already understand JavaScript, it's not going to be a huge stretch for you to understand TypeScript. JavaScript is sometimes described as driving a car with no seatbelt, whereas TypeScript is actually using that seatbelt. Unfortunately, these days, almost nobody is going to allow you to write JavaScript in their production level code bases. So TypeScript is a way that people can resolve type errors before runtime and just reduce the overall number of errors in the code. The easiest way to learn TypeScript is by just changing all of the endings of your JavaScript files from JS to TS and just write normal JavaScript in there. You don't need to spend too much time learning TypeScript specifically. If you include it in your project, your IDE is going to start shouting at you when you make a mistake. Just make that adjustment and move on from there. You'll gradually pick up TypeScript, so don't worry about learning it all in one go. To speed up the development process, what you want to do is optimize your IDE, and TypeScript allows you to do that. Another way to improve the code that you're writing is by using a tool called ESLint and Prettier to make your code look more beautiful. If you want to see what my config looks like, I'm going to share that in my Substack this week, so you can subscribe to that down below. Now, finally, you've learned HTML, CSS, JavaScript, React, NextJS, and Tailwind CSS. And if you've stuck with everything, you've also learned a little bit of TypeScript. Once you've learned all of these things, it's time to start applying for jobs. To get a job, there's a couple of approaches you can take. The traditional approach is that you improve your algorithm skills so you can pass the technical interviews. In order to do that, you need to go to a site called LeetCode and try to get to a level where you can complete medium problems in about 45 minutes. You can also use something called Code Wars, and where you want to get to a level 5 in order to pass the technical interview. My preferred approach is to avoid using the quick apply option on LinkedIn because it's just too competitive. And I don't know if you knew this already, but to post a job on LinkedIn, companies actually have to pay, I think it's between $250 and $350. And many of the companies that are going to be willing to hire you as a beginner developer are not going to want to put that kind of capital forward just to try and hire somebody. So there is an easier approach. In my experience, one of the easiest ways to get a job is to search for local marketing agencies. These are the type of companies that are going to be willing to hire somebody with less experience, and they often have websites that are easy to find. If you go to their website, there's sometimes going to be a careers page, and that's going to have maybe options for you to get a job there. So you just fill out the form and apply there. One of the slightly cheekier options is to find out who actually runs that digital marketing agency and reach out to them directly in a DM on LinkedIn. What you're going to do is just offer them some kind of a value up front, give them a compliment, tell them how much you like the company and how you would like to work together. Often sending 10 of these kind of DMs is going to get you a lot more responses than sending 1,000 of these quick applies on LinkedIn. So this is definitely the approach that I recommend, and probably the most valuable advice you're going to see in this video. Now, I've been talking for a while and I've mentioned a bunch of technologies that you need to learn and how to get a job. But I do want to touch slightly on back-end developers because I don't want you to feel left out. To learn back-end development, I recommend sticking with the JavaScript ecosystem. This is not because it's the best language for the back end, but it's just because it's what you're going to be familiar with if you've already followed along the rest of this process. Fortunately for us JavaScript developers, Node.js and JavaScript on the back end is becoming more and more popular. I think that this is because there's just an abundance of JavaScript developers, and employers are trying to open their job opportunities to as many people as possible. Just like everything in the JavaScript ecosystem, there is a framework for the back end. So you want to be writing in Node, and you want to be using the framework called Express. The easiest way to learn this is by following this tutorial down below. This is by Brad, and he gives fantastic advice and fantastic tutorials that are easy to follow along. you want to follow these tutorials and understand how the backend works. You can actually even host your backend for free using a website called Railway. And what's crazy is now with the combination of Vercel or Netlify and Railway, you can host a full stack app for free. If you've got a full stack app hosted and a recruiter comes across your page, they're going to be blown away and you're just going to put yourself way ahead of the other candidates. Okay, I think it's time for me to stop talking. I've gone on for long enough. I just want to give you a quick summary to remind you of everything that we talked about. I recommend that you learn front-end development using the Odin Project Fundamentals course. Once you reach the React part, I want you to go to the React beta docs or the Scrimba tutorial. After that, you want to extend your knowledge by learning NextJS. Then I suggest that you learn how to read the Tailwind CSS docs and you start to implement Tailwind CSS to make CSS faster and easier. Once you have that down, I suggest that you replace all your JavaScript files with TypeScript files and gradually start to improve your TypeScript skills. If you still feel tempted to learn backend, you want to focus on Node.js with an Express framework. Finally, you need to make a beautiful portfolio website with fantastic projects that are hosted for free using Netlify or Vercel. And then once that's all done, you want to start getting a job by DMing people on LinkedIn. I'm telling you this is going to work for you. To help me grow this channel and to reach more people, comment down below which resource you found the most useful in this video, and it's really going to boost me in the algorithm and help me smile. Also, if you want to see that VS Code config that I'm going to share this week, you can join my Substack, link down below. And of course, subscribe for future videos. Thanks a million for watching this all the way through. That's it from me. Ciao for now.